Well, what's up again there, guys? Brian here, D3 Topics Gamer, here to give you another one of my worst best ranking videos to share with you guys today. Now, I sent out a request on my community section of my channel asking for ideas for future rankings, reviews, or just discussion videos, and you guys came through with a bunch of ideas. So now that I have a whole day and a half to film, I figured I'd try to knock out as many of these ideas as I could. And this one in particular is going to focus on me doing my personal ranking and thoughts on the entire Matrix franchise. Now, if you do happen to enjoy this video by the end, please do not forget to like, share, and subscribe to keep track of me in my future videos. And remember, guys, if you have any ideas for future videos, please let me know in the comments down below. And before I start, I just want to give this viewer a special shout out for sending out this idea. So without wasting any time, let's start off with what I consider to be my least favorite entry in the Matrix franchise. Okay, starting off with my least favorite entry in the entire Matrix film franchise series. It has to undoubtedly go to the latest entry in the form of The Matrix Resurrection. I have one question. Why the hell was this film even made? It was, in my opinion, it's the only entry in this entire series that is completely, utterly pointless. There is just something about these studios trying to resurrect old franchises and try to build off our nostalgic love for old franchises that I just think is just kind of toxic. And this film is a clear example of that. I mean, sure, I guess some of us were really kind of excited to kind of see these characters that we really enjoyed the first time going around, seeing them come back and seeing what story that they could be told. But when we finally got the film, it didn't really tell a story that I thought was really useful. I mean, what questions did we have by the end of Matrix Revolution that weren't answered? It just seemed to just bring up all kinds of really confusing ideas that I just don't think didn't work. And it didn't really even help that you couldn't even get the entire primary cast from the main series of films back. I mean, you got some of them back, but like they weren't really useful. I mean, sure, it was nice seeing Keanu Reeves revisit an old character, but I kind of felt like we were past that. There really wasn't any questions to be answered about Neo. And it just kind of undid a lot of the really cool elements that were even in the first set of trilogy films of the Matrix series. So I just didn't think that this film was really needed. And there's just something about trying to tell a story a good amount of time after you first told it. There's just something special from 1999 to 2003 when the last Matrix film came out. There's just something special about that period, despite its flaws, that makes those films work a lot more as you're telling the story when really it was at its most popular. But when you try to go back and revisit it just doesn't work because the thought pattern of everyone has completely changed. And so that film feels very, very disconnected from the four primary Matrix film stories. That's why, even to this day, I only saw this film once. I didn't like it. I don't want to watch it again. And I certainly would not recommend it to anybody that actually enjoyed the first three films, which is why, without question, Matrix Resurrection is my least favorite Matrix films in this series. Taking the number 4 spot on my list is going to have to go to The Animatrix. Now, tactically, The Animatrix isn't necessarily one whole film. It's a series of short story films that are told in different styles, with each of these individual stories either giving us elements that were happening during the primary trilogy of films, like in the event like the story of the Final Flight of the Osiris, which is talked a little bit about at the beginning of Matrix Reloaded, or it goes on these little side missions involving characters that we know or characters that were introduced in the Matrix Reloaded. And I also like how it actually went into a little bit of depth into the history of that world, explaining like by far my favorite short story that was cut into 2 parts was, I believe it was called the Renaissance, I believe it's called, that pretty much told as for how the machines actually took over and how humanity were so threatened by the robots that they actually thought that they could block out the sun, cutting off their main source of power. And without the sun, the robots needed to find a new source of power, and heck, they found us, so that's how the whole thing started. I really like those type of stories, and I really think that the different type of styles of art styles was very interesting. This is something that we have seen done in several franchises where they'll try to tell different stories or different parts of a story in different styles of artwork, in different styles, and that's something I've always really enjoyed. But it take the 4th spot just because there's like some stories I really like and some stories I thought were okay, and then some stories that I just didn't really care much for because I don't think they added too much. But each of them is very interesting and unique in their own special way. And if you haven't had a chance to watch Animatrix, I would definitely recommend that you go back and check it out because it's actually a pretty interesting watch, which is why I'm happy to put it in the 4th spot on my list. Going into number 3 has to go to the ending of the primary Matrix trilogy, which was The Matrix Revolution. This film came out at near the end of 2003 and pretty much tells the final chapter of the primary Matrix trilogy. Out of the primary trilogy, obviously this is the most flawed. This battle pretty much kind of continues off from the events of the Matrix Reloaded, in terms of Neo being trapped kind of in this middle spot between the real world and the Matrix, and the machines are coming down to kill the last humans in Zion, and then needing to kind of find out what Smith is doing because he's become this new virus that is slowly taking over the Matrix. And there's a number of different elements. This film has a number of flaws, but I think it's a fun watch. I think the action set pieces is pretty cool. I think that the fight between Neo and Smith at the end was pretty epic. I definitely like the atmosphere that it set up, even though it does go a little bit over the top over the end. I thought the use of characters was not really done too much, but again, it seemed like they were trying to rush to the ending. But overall, I just think it's a solid watch, but it's undoubtedly the weakest of the trilogy. And I do think it does a solid job of giving us an ending. No, it's not as great as it could have been, but I think it's a good ending to this trilogy, which is why it takes number 3 spot on my list. The number 2 spot obviously has to also go to The Matrix Reloaded, which is the sequel to The Matrix, which also came out kind of in the early part of 2003. And something that I didn't even realize until I actually did some research on this list, I did not even realize that The Matrix Reloaded and The Matrix Revolution came out in the same year. I didn't realize that. I always felt that the third film came out a little bit later, but no, they came out in the same year, about maybe close 6 months apart. So this was actually kind of doing the 2-part ending idea long before other films were doing it, like Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, or the end of the Twilight series, or the end of the Hunger Games series, where they were releasing the last part 2 parts. So it's nice to see that the Matrix was ahead of that at the beginning. Now, I will say that despite its minor flaws, The Matrix Reloaded is probably my favorite one to watch out of the 3 films. It's certainly not in terms of overall quality as good as the first film, but it's certainly the most fun to watch, and it's by far the one I've seen the most. And I think even that film actually connects the most to, one of my favorite, game connecting to series games in the series of Enter the Matrix. I think that one kind of connects to that game the most. There's a lot of cool things about this film. Number one, you kind of see Neo at his prime when he has full control over his powers. I absolutely love the highway scene. It's by far my favorite highway chase in any film in general. This film also has my favorite soundtrack of all time. I love a lot of the newer characters that show up that aren't given as much screen time as you would want, but they make their limited screen time very, very effective. I absolutely love the multi-Smith fight. Some people think it's a kind of ridiculous because they start creating these characters in like CG. They try making like CGI characters, but here's why for me that works. It works for me because you have to remember we're in a computer world, and I think that if you do that, if you make CGI, if you make your characters in CGI, and we're in a computer world, it works for me. Now, going back, looking at it now, 20 years later, it doesn't look a little dated, but it's still pretty fun to watch. And I just think that a lot of the primary cast characters get the most to do in this film. Certainly a lot more than they did in, I would say, the first film in some aspects. And I just like the idea of them kind of setting up for the attack of the Sentinels and setting everything up and seeing things from a different perspective, especially if you've played Enter the Matrix. So I just think that out of all of the primary 3 films, this is the one I get the most out of. But I do acknowledge that in terms of quality, it's just a little bit flawed. But again, it is by far the one that I have the most fun with, which is why I'm happy to put it in the number 2 spot on my list. All right, going into number 1, and without question, I would be very surprised that if any of you guys share your list and you don't put the first Matrix film as the best Matrix film, I will be very, very surprised. But obviously, it was going to be number 1. This is the film that started it out. It came out in 1999, and the promotion for this film was really insane. No one really knew what The Matrix was. That was what the whole promotion was. And then when the film finally came out, it turned out to be quite an experience. We saw things in this film that up to this point in the film industry we had never seen before done in this style. It was so stylized. There were so many creative elements. It was such a sophisticated story that had so much depth. The characters, few of them were given a lot of depth. Most of the crew of the Nebuchadnezzar weren't really given much to do instead of just being killed off one by one, which was kind of unfortunate. The ones that did survive were going to be the primary characters that we would follow for the rest of this series, so there is that. It's just a fun film. Action scenes are great, soundtrack is great, Agent Smith is, to this day, one of the most iconic movie villains in cinema history. There's just so many great things that hold up even to this day. I mean, this film is over 20 years old, and people still talk about it to this day. And I think that's just a testament to just how creative and influential this film was to not only its time, but even decades later. We are still seeing elements that started in this film being used to this day. So I just think that just is a testament just how much of an incredible and just game-changing film the first Matrix film was, which is why, without question, it has to be the number one spot on my list. So that is my ranking of the 5 primary movie entries in the Matrix franchise. Now, if you've seen all of them, how would you rank them? Share your list with me and everyone else in the comments down below. And like always, thank you guys for watching. You're awesome, and I'll see you all next time.